Vintage FD lens adapter. Fotodiox Pro FD to RF.
All right, hello, welcome to the video. Today we're going to be talking about this adapter. This is a Fotodiox FD to RF mount adapter. And if you're like me and you love shooting with vintage lenses, this video is for you. In fact, I got a bunch of vintage lens videos on the channel and I'm going to keep pumping out some more. So if you're into vintage lens photography, videography, definitely subscribe to the channel. So yes, with the new mirrorless cameras and the removal of the mirror, it's become very easy to mount vintage glass onto modern cameras. So that is awesome. And if you're like me and you like shooting with vintage lenses, these are the Canon FD or new FD, NFDs, whatever you want to call them. And I love shooting with them. And in order to mount them to your RF mount, you need an adapter. And this is the adapter that I have chosen. This is the Fotodiox. They say on the adapter, it's an Fotodiox Pro FD to EOS R adapter. I don't know why it says EOS R, it's FD to RF. So don't let that confuse you when you read it, because you might think this is only for the EOS R. It's for the EOS R system, which has an RF mount. And we're gonna test this adapter today on the R5, and we're gonna test it on an R7. So that's a full frame camera and an APS-C censored camera. And yeah, all right, let's get into it. All right, so the first thing we're gonna look at is build quality, and I have to say build quality on this thing is 10 out of 10. It is absolutely awesome. It's a solid metal build. If you dropped it, it would not break. There's no plastic bits on here. The ring is metal, the base is metal, the mounts are metal, and that is fantastic. So that's a big thumbs up to Fotodiox for that. The mounts are both metal on either side, but there is no weather sealing on it. So if you're shooting in the rain, that's just something to keep in mind. But these old vintage lenses are probably not weather sealed. So yeah, it doesn't really matter there, but just something to keep in mind. Now this lens does have a tripod collar, which I have removed right here. I'm gonna just pop that on for you so you can take a look and see what that looks like. And that's what it looks like with the tripod collar on there. You have a screw mount on there, so you can mount it to a tripod base and then attach it to your tripod. The tripod collar is also Arca Swiss compatible, so if you have an Arca Swiss plate, you can attach the adapter directly to there and then have your lens and your camera also attached, obviously. So yeah, that's a cool little feature of this adapter. Now, in regards to mounting, this is the thing I really love about this adapter. Some adapters, you have a little pin inside that you have to move, because there's a pin on the FD lenses that you have to push in or activate in order for you to be able to use aperture. But some of the adapters, the FD to RF adapters, you have to go manually set the pin in the right place. But with this adapter, it's got a little ring, and when you turn the ring, you'll see on one side it says install, on the other side you have pictures of aperture blades. So what you do is you set it to install, you click the lens in, and you turn the ring into the aperture blades, and then the little pin inside automatically activates the pin inside the FD lens, so you don't have to worry about lining everything up. It just works, it's beautiful. So let's install a lens and I'll show you how that works. All right, so let's talk about how to mount your vintage lens to the adapter and the adapter to the camera. So first thing you gotta do is you gotta turn this ring here, make sure it's set to install and not the aperture blades. If it's set to the aperture blades, it's not gonna install correctly, so set it to install. Step one complete. Now what you have to do is line up the red dot on the lens with the red dot on the adapter. You line it up and turn the lens until you hear the click. Now it's locked into place, and then you take this ring and you slide it from install over to aperture. So now you can control the aperture on the lens. Now let's mount it to a camera. All right, when it comes to mounting to a camera, just mount it like any other lens. You have the red dot on the camera, you have the red dot on the adapter. You line up the red dots and turn it till you hear a click. And you're mounted. Now let's talk about filming with these vintage lenses on full frame cameras versus APS-C cameras, because some people may know this, some people may not, but there's a different crop involved with APS-C and full frame. Obviously these vintage lenses are designed for full frame cameras, so we're gonna use this 24mm full frame vintage lens here, and we are going to mount it to the camera, and we're gonna use that to show an example between APS-C and full frame. So let's mount it. All right, let's change the aperture here. We are going to go to, let's go to f4 because these vintage lenses are never sharp, wide open. Modern lenses are definitely, and then we'll have to manually focus all this. So let's go to f4 and manually focus. There we go. Looks like I'm in focus. That's the one thing you got to get used to filming yourself. It's kind of tough to film yourself with vintage lenses, but here we go. I think we're in focus. It looks like I'm in focus on the screen. So this is 24 millimeter on a Canon R5 full frame sensor. So you can see it's an actual 24 millimeter. I'm holding it about hand's length here. And yeah, so this is actually it looks a little dark. Let's, can we change the aperture while we're filming? Yeah, here we go. Okay, so ISO 400. And yeah, this is what 24 millimeter looks like on a full frame sensor. Now, let's mount this to the EOS R7 and we'll take a look at what this 24 millimeter looks like on an APS-C. Okay, so now we're mounted on the EOS R7 and let's see if we can focus this. Okay, so on an EOS R7 with the 1.6 crop factor, this is what a 24 millimeter lens looks like. Obviously, we're way closer. I don't know if that's in focus or not, but anyway, this point of this is to show the crop factor. Now, vintage lenses are all set up for full frame sensors. If you want to use them on a crop camera like an R7 or a Fuji X-H2 and that kind of thing, you're going to have to deal with this 1.6 crop factor. Now, if you want to figure out what the crop factor is with your lens on an APS-C size camera, I don't know if I'm focused or not, but anyway, I'm distracting myself looking at the screen thinking about focus. So what you have to do is if you want to calculate the converted focal length of a lens on an APS-C sensor is just take the millimeters of the lens and multiply by 1.6. So here's some calculations somewhere on the screen if you want to take a look at that. That'll give you a general idea of what full frame lenses on APS-C sensors look like. So it's just something to keep in mind. But if you're shooting with APS-C in general, you want a little more range. They're fun for shooting like sports or birds and that kind of thing. So you get a little extra range out of your lenses. And now there's one menu setting you have to change in your camera's menu in order to shoot with vintage lenses because the camera will not recognize a vintage lens as anything because there's no electronics going back and forth between the camera and the lens. So the camera's going to think there's no lens on the front and it won't actually take photos when you mount the lens on there. So there's one setting in the menu you have to change. But before we do that, I'm going to show you what a 17 millimeter f4 lens looks like on the 1.6 crop factor APS-C size sensor. All right, let's get that on there. All right, 17 millimeters, here we are. Okay, so we're still at arm's length from the lens. We haven't moved any closer or further away. This is what 17 millimeters looks like on an APS-C size sensor. So I just wanted to show you this because if you want to do some talking head stuff for YouTube or TikTok or Instagram Reels and that kind of thing, and you're looking for a vintage lens that you can manually focus at arm's length, 17 millimeter is the way to go. This lens is the FD 17 millimeter f4. And I find it good for this kind of thing, and obviously we get those beautiful retro colors. All right, so now I'm gonna pop this on the R5 and I'm gonna show you what menu settings you have to change in your camera's menu in order to use vintage lenses on your mirrorless camera. All right, so now we're back on a full frame sensor and we're just focusing here. That looks about right. And as you can see, it's a completely different perspective on a full frame sensor. We get super wide. So we're still at arm's length from the lens. So distance hasn't changed or anything, just different perspective because of the size of the sensor. Now, there's one thing I have to show you. In order to use vintage lenses on modern mirrorless cameras, there's a setting you have to change. And this goes across the board on all camera systems, whether you're shooting Sony or Lumix, Canon, Nikon. They all have a similar setting in the menu. Each system obviously is called something different. And the one thing I noticed with the Canons is that it's all in the orange tab, but it's in a different, I guess, tab within the orange tab, different page within the orange tab. So just go to your orange tab if you're shooting with a Canon camera and look for a setting called Release Shutter WO Lens. So Release Shutter Without Lens. And basically, as I explained before, there's no electronics in vintage lenses, so the camera doesn't recognize that there's a lens on the camera and it won't actuate the shutter because it thinks there's no lens there. So you have to trick the camera by turning on the setting and the shutter will activate even if there's no lens on the camera, but there is a lens. You have a vintage lens on there. So yeah. All right, now in terms of my personal opinion about this adapter after 2 years of use, I think it is absolutely fantastic. There's affiliate links down below in the description, so if you want to pick up this adapter, you can go click on those links. Helps out the channel a little bit, doesn't cost you anything more, and I would really appreciate it. So yeah, this adapter, I've had it for 2 years. I've used it with FD lenses, NFD lenses, and those old breech mount lock lenses, and I've had zero issues with them whatsoever. Everything just locks in nice and tight. I can focus to infinity. I can focus to the minimum focus distance. The focus is smooth. The images are sharp. Obviously, it's manual focus, so you have to manually focus, but there is absolutely no issues whatsoever with the build of this adapter. It fits nice and snug on my EOS R, my R5, and my R7. So yeah, it's really built nicely, and the fact that it's a solid metal build is also a huge plus. I really appreciate that. So yeah, this Fotodiox adapter definitely gets thumbs up from me. That is it. That is the end of the video. If you have any questions about vintage lenses, leave them down below in the comments, and I definitely have a bunch more vintage lenses we're going to review and test and use on this channel. So if you're into that kind of thing, definitely subscribe, and I will see you guys in the next video. And if you're curious to see what happens when you take a vintage lens off a camera while it's still recording, this is what it looks like. All right, see you guys in the next video.